Well, welcome to Drama Mamas. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
I wanted to ask, did you grow up in a musical household? How did you start getting into drumming?
It was a really nature nurture. I'm not sure. My dad was a builder. My mum worked in the NHS, so really I shouldn't have got this bug. But around 8 years of age, my dad gave me a drum that had belonged to his brother who had passed away, and he just sort of said like, well, this has been lying around, and I just loved it. I just had a pair of sticks and this old snare drum, and I just loved it, and I couldn't stop playing. Then I joined the Boys Brigade for the simple reason that they had drums, and I wanted to learn how to play the drums. So I learned how to do the mummy daddies, and I loved it. I just was obsessed. And then my dad, one of his labourers was a guy called Gary Buckner, who's still very active on the drumming scene in Kent, and he lent me two albums. One was The Kings of Percussion by Buddy Rich and Louis Bellson and Gene Krupa, and The Wailing Buddy Rich. These two vinyl albums. I don't have those copies, but I have copies right behind me in my Buddy collection now. And I just was obsessed. I got a record player because my uncle was a DJ, and just that was it. I just wanted to, that's all I wanted to do. So nobody had to push me. There was no sort of like, oh, come on, go to music lessons. I just absolutely loved it. And I do point this out quite a lot because I'm, the age I'm at. When I was growing up, there was nothing to do on a school holiday. Your mum and dad just were like, clear off. We got to go work. It's child abuse now, but you just have to go to the park. And if it was raining, sit in the shelter there. And so to have drumming for me was absolutely, oh, I've got something to do. So I
Yeah.
just used to sit and practice and play all the time and listen to music in any way that I could. And when I was about 11, 12, I was getting on a train. This is why I don't, I'm letting my 14, 15-year-old boys sort of do this journey now. I used to get on a train and go up to the West End with Gary Wallace and just hang around in the record shops buying vinyl all day at 11, 12 years of age. You couldn't do that now, or you allegedly shouldn't do that. But that's what I did, and I got this just had this amazing time just getting involved in bands, and I just was left to my own devices to a certain degree.
You said you had a snare drum. When did you actually get a full-on drum kit, and what was the response in the house?
Well, I was absolutely like gagging to get a drum set, and then we found like I think we paid about 12 quid for it. It was an old John Gray drum set which had a blue bass drum and red tom toms, and I couldn't work out for the first week. Every time I put the tom tom, that the kit fell over because it didn't have a spur. So I had to sort of prop it up. Then I got an English Rogers drum kit. And then there was this strange thing that happened. I ended up being able to buy about age 14, due to quite a weird situation that happened in our road. A lady offered to sell me a drum set from her ex-husband who had been kicked out in mysterious circumstances. This pretty much £1,100 worth of drums, a pearl wood fibre kit, absolutely brand new, all with Paiste cymbals. And I think she let me have it for like 100 quid. And I said, won't he be really upset about that? And she said, yes. So I got the drum set, and having at 14, 15 pro gear was just incredible because I joined the Musicians Union, and you had to join the Musicians Union. You had to audition. I went down to Charlton Athletic Football Club, their clubhouse, on a Sunday, and I had to play my mummy daddies, and I had to play a foxtrot, and I had to play a swing, and I had to give them like 75 pence, and I got a junior membership to the Musicians Union. And then this guy kind of walked up to me and went, literally, do you want to do a gig next Saturday night? And I'm like, what? And he's like, look, we need a drummer, Sidcup Conservative Club, do you want to do it? And I went, yeah, all right. And I turned up with my dad because I couldn't drive the kit there, set this very nice professional drum kit up, and he was very impressed. And he literally just said, look, I'm going to count it off. Swing, 1, 2, 3, 4, ding, ding, a ding, ding, a ding. And he would just go, this guy Roy would just go through this myriad of songs that he knew, this jukebox, just, and when they stopped dancing, he would say, right, 3, 4, waltz. And he'd do like, Please Release Me. And he'd do, all the waltzes. And then if it was, rock and roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, dung, 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 dung. And he'd do all the Buddy Holly tunes. It's like a jukebox. And all the time, I'm just sitting there watching him, just no idea what we were playing. And at the end of the night, I got like about 35 quid, which in 1981, 82 was quite a lot of money. And my dad literally looked at him and said to this guy, do you want him next weekend? I was like, so that's what we used to do every weekend. My dad would drive me and I would go off to various working men's clubs around southeast London, the Irish Bar in Woolwich, Liberal Club in Hatcham, in Peckham, Labour clubs, Conservative clubs, WCU clubs. I would just play every weekend. And that, to me, got me the job with the Style Council, because it was exactly the same process of Paul going, a radio show, going, look, I've not really written this song. I don't really know where it goes. Just follow me. And that was, such an important lesson for me.
Can I ask, to do with that kit, so your brother also got into drums. Was there any rivalry over the drum kit?
Well, what happened was Alan is obviously 7 years younger than me. So I had sort of success with the Style Council when I was 17, 18. And I know it sounds really weird, but I was able to buy a house when I was 18. I didn't living it that often because I was touring, but I had this house. So I kind of was gone. And my dad had built me this wonderful little construction in our loft, which was completely unsoundproof and freezing. But I used to spend hours and hours up there. So when I moved out, aged sort of 17, 18 pretty much, Alan, being 13, 14, went up to the loft and discovered this white marine pearl kit that I'd got that was set up as my practice kit, and basically said, can I have a go? And I was like, yeah, I'll have a go. And pretty quickly he said, I really want to learn this stuff. So I took him to Bob Armstrong, who I was studying with, and just said, look, can you have a look at him? And all of a sudden, Alan was doing the Chapin books. He was doing the Gary Chafee books. He was doing all these rudiments. Far more talented than I actually was. He was not a great practicer, but he was a great consumer. And I remember apologising to Bob when Alan was about 15, saying, look, I'm really sorry, Bob. I know he's not been practising as much as he should. And Bob said to me, I've got no worries about Alan. He's going to be in a really big band. That was the prophet, Bob.
Wow. Yeah. You went to Bob as well, didn't you?
I went to Bob once, kind of, I was already working. So from when I was like 14, I was, I was making money playing the drums. And when I just felt that there were things that I was not getting, because we lived in the UK and it was very difficult to get exposure to like the Gary Chafee methods and the molar stuff. And we got the books, but we didn't know how to use them. And I was kind of aware I'm missing something out here. There's something not right. And I went into the West End one day to a shop called All Bang and Strum It, on my weekly sort of troll around the drum shops of the West End to get catalogues and things, which we all used to do as kids. And I saw this like picture on the wall, on the door of All Bang and Strum It in Covent Garden, with it just said Bob Armstrong, drum teacher, Hornchurch, Essex, and it had a phone number. And I remembered the phone number, just remembered it, got back, phoned up and just said, could I come for drum lessons? And Bob was like, actually, I've got a vacancy, which was very rare in those days. And I started the following week and it was just mind blown the first lesson, because he literally said to me, well, show me your paradiddle. So I started playing a paradiddle on the snare, on the practice pad, and it was just literally an individual stroke, paradiddle, paradiddle, which is all I knew. And it was reasonably fast. And Bob said, have you ever thought or been taught about the idea of upstrokes and downstrokes? So you would play it as down, up, tap, tap, down, up, tap, tap. That was it. That was like mind blown. That was what was missing for me. With all of those books, with the Chapin book, down, down, up, tap, down, up, down, all of that kind of stuff and accenting, it just became like, my playing, I think, just went up by 1,000 degrees from that one experience. So I loved it. I loved all my time with Bob, and it was like a really incredibly valuable time, because I was focused, I was getting paid, had somewhere to practice. I appreciated that. I was mad into fitness, super into like running and martial arts. And, you know, it was just an amazing sort of period to be a young drummer in a really big pop band, which it was.
It's funny you mentioned Bob because that was going to be my question because I was just getting flashbacks then of you just going
Yeah.
down, down. He,
Good day.
but obviously he was incredibly influential as a teacher. Did you have any other teachers, or I heard that you were offered a scholarship at one point. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I wrote a letter like to EG management on the King's Road to Bill Bruford and said to Bill, could I have some lessons? And I'd left my phone number, my mum's phone number, the phone number that she still has, which is the phone number that took the call from Noel Gallagher when Alan got the job with Oasis, took the job with me when I got the Style Council. But the phone went one day and my mum went, oh, it's Bill Bruford. And I'm like on the phone to Bill Bruford, and he's like, he's quite, you know, Bill is an amazing person. He's very straight to the point. He's like, well, lessons, what do you mean? You know, I was like, just like to come for some drum lessons. He's like, well, I don't really teach, but you can come down for a bit, you know. And we went off in my dad's Sherpa van to Bill's house, and my dad was like in the van, and Caroline, his wife, invited him in for a cup of tea, and she's a potter, and they were talking about plastering and all this kind of thing. And I went into this amazing drum room, and I didn't really have lessons with Bill, but just had like time with him. And he would like put on like a Miles Davis record, and we'd listen to it, and he's going, "Do you get it?" And I'm kind of going, "No." He's like, "Just well, listen. What do we hear? What do we hear?" And it was all very esoteric, but amazingly valuable. You know, wise words of this genius who I adore Bill. And then there was this thing about the Percussion Institute, PIT, which had just started in Los Angeles. And he said to me, look, I've got this scholarship that I can give and I'd like you to have it. And it was towards the tuition to go out to PIT. The problem was that at that time in America, you had to have enough money in the bank to support yourself for a year. So really, even though there was a $10,000 bursary, you really had to have another $20,000 to say that you've got. So for my parents, that was like, that might as well have been, you know, that was the lottery. And I didn't want to put that pressure because I could tell that they were really like, they wanted me to kind of go. But it just, in the end, it just was not meant to be. And I accepted that. I remember going to all these different places that had bursaries. Like, you know, you'd go to this office, this dusty old office. I remember going up to the GLC, and there was this really sort of, she looked about 101. She's probably about 60. And she was looking down her nose at me, and she sort of said, if you think we are wasting money for you to go to the Sunshine and play the drums, you have another thing coming, young man. And it was like, oh, okay. So I was still in sixth form at that point, and I came back and I literally said, well, that's it. I'm done with education. I don't want anything more to do with it. I don't care about my GCSEs. I probably failed, well, my O-levels, probably CSEs, probably failed them all, which I had. I'm leaving. And my mum went, that's fine. You've got to get a job. It was that simple. You have to get a job. You can't, you know, you're not going to the fridge, taking food out and not paying, which I had been because I was like working. But it was like, well, you know, you've decided now, you've made your decision, you've got to get a job. And that's when I ended up working with Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford, because Gary Wallace had heard that they were looking for a drummer. Gary Wallace, the legendary Tom Jones and a million other people, drummer who I'd known since I was 11. He'd recommended me to Glenn and Chris, and they were looking for a drummer for what was probably the first jukebox musical, labelled with love, which was using songs from Squeeze and telling a story around it. And I think there's a lady called Alison Limerick that was in it, who's possibly featuring in a John Lewis advert at the moment. So Alison was in the play, and Danny John Jules and Eamon Walker, all these young talents that were in the play. I might have been 17 and it needed to be 18. It was a long time ago. But I lied about my age. I got the job. And I did that for about 4 months. Incidentally, I actually got a call a year ago to go and work on a couple of songs for Squeeze on their new album, which were songs that were written when Glenn and Chris were in their teens. this thing called Trixie, this whole project called Trixie. So I'm actually on two songs on that record, which is a circular thing of almost 45 years, which is incredible. So I'm really, very grateful for that. Yeah, it was an incredible time, and I was kind of out of work for a couple of days when the call came that I was auditioning around London. I used to go to any audition. There was a lot more studios. I spent an afternoon auditioning for Mick Khan, who was the bass player from Japan, the band Japan, the most incredible bass player. And it was obvious the minute that I got in there that I was not going to get the gig. And I was kind of anxious to sort of leave. And he was like, no, just stay for a bit, just jam. Let's just, So there I am, sort of jamming with Mick Khan, playing this amazing fretless bass, knowing that I'd not got the gig, but him wanting to say, look, you've not got this job, but you're pretty good, mate. Just keep going, And then I auditioned for a band that was signed to Polydor, and they'd gone in and said, like, no, we didn't really sort of get a drummer. And the A&R man said, like, I've got to find a drummer. Where do you find a drummer that can play a bit of jazz and is really young? And they went, we just seen one. And I went up and did the audition, and I said to Paul, what are you listening to? And he's like, Art Blakey. And I did a terrible Art Blakey impression. And then he said, what else you listen to? He said, Elvin Jones. And did a terrible Elvin Jones impression. And he said, oh, right, okay, well, we've got this thing at the weekend. We've got a drummer for that, but I'm doing a radio show next week. Do you want to come and do it? And I'm like, yeah. He went, go and tell the big fella that you're doing the radio show. And that was how I got the job.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit because I sort of had one of those funny moments where one of my early drum teachers used to put on a lot of drum clinics in Swindon, and you were one of the first clinics that I went to. And I wondered what your kind of take on it is, because you then, in 2001, I think you had the huge clinic tour with Chad Smith as well, and that was a very big part of the industry.
Yeah.
So how has that changed over the years? Can you tell us about that?
When I first started to do it, to do the clinics, she's bored now. It was like the Pearl, George Frederick, the legend of George Frederick, that Pearl wanted to reach out to younger musicians. I used to attend drum clinics, and they were very simple events. There would be a shop or a dealer would bring in like Les de Merle or Louis Belson or Bobby Orr. There would be a drum set, there'd be some cymbals, they would play, they would talk, and it would be a very low-key event. There'd be no play-alongs, no lights, no bells and whistles. That didn't happen. And I used to love that. I used to think it was a really pure kind of experience with a drummer. The Louis Belson ones that I attended, I got so much out of them. So when I started working with Pearl when I was about 18, they wanted very much to reach out to younger musicians, to younger players. And very much the criteria then was like, the perfect combination was someone that could play but was in a big band. So the clinicians of the time were like Mark Brzezicki, because he was in Big Country, and Big Country were on top of the pops. Chris Sharrock was a big name then, because he was in Icicle Works and he was all over the telly. So for me, being in a band and being obviously sat there with Match Grip and playing my paradiddles, I was a sort of perfect candidate to be asked to go and do clinics for younger people. So at that time, it just a little bit of serendipity. It really clicked because the band were very popular. I could play a bit, and I just was always saying to George, I should do some little sheets so they've got something to take away, to give something back. And that really was very, very successful. I mean, obviously now, you don't have to be in a big band to be a big clinician. You don't have to be in any band to be a clinician. Sometimes it's preferable not to be in a band and just to play endless chops. And that's absolutely fine. I get that. It's another facet of the industry. It's kind of moved on into that different direction. But back then, you very much had to be validated by the fact that you were in a band. Mel Gaynor, Simple Minds, and what I thought was so great about that is that they were able to sort of bring that experience and say, a lot of the talk then was like, well, you've got to get into a band. You've got to get into a band, And I've met so many younger people that, Jamie Morrison and Woody from Bastille, that said they came to clinics just like you did. And it was like talking about getting into bands. That was really important. So I think the difference is that now it's like, there's a kind of a whole sub-industry of drummers that are drummers. They're not musicians, and some amazing talent out there, you know, and potentially a lot of arthritis much later down the line. But it's kind of what it is. But that was always the thing then. The perfect combination for companies were drummers that were in bands and could play a bit.
I wanted to shift gears and talk about social media a little bit and get your thoughts on it. Do you ever feel pressure to post, and where are you at?
Well, I think it's a really interesting thing about social media that all of the people that run social media are narcissists, fascists, just incredibly negative, weird people. And we happily entrust our youth with these people's ambitions. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. You know, it's an interesting thing that a lot of those guys that run the meta industries do not let their kids go on social media. So I think that kind of should give us sort of some little alarm bells. I feel no pressure really. I quite enjoy the odd Instagram post, posting an odd snare drum. I've learned my lesson. I'm very delineated about it. I have a Facebook account because the people that are interested in what I do still tend to like Facebook, not so much TikTok. It's knowing where your market is. So I know that people that have followed me for years find Facebook an easy place, but I have 2 Facebook accounts. One is a business. It's all about the snare drums. It's about, I'm doing this if you're interested. And then I have a personal one. The personal one, I have no friends on that I have never met in the flesh. So if I've not ever met you, you're not on that account. Because if I want to post something about how much I hate something, as a discussion, I'm not going to be told by some Wally in a bedroom that Nigel Farage is the best thing that this country can hope for. It's just not going to happen. But I can talk to friends about that, and then we can have an open debate about it. So I'm very delineated about it. Instagram, I love, the odd thing I really enjoy just sharing stuff because I've got books out, like little patterns, which people appreciate. Some people don't care. But on the greater scheme of things, I think that if you are not paying regularly into that system, you are simply a customer. You're simply somebody that they are trying to sell stuff to. It doesn't matter what it is. And when you think that, poor Lewis Hamilton, who lost his little dog recently, that his dog had 1.2 million followers on Instagram, then you kind of have to sort of get a little sense of perspective on how really important it is. When I do little events around the country, I'll always say to people, look, don't just rely on sticking a post on Instagram or Facebook. That is infinitesimal. You need to go to the local drum teachers, tell them, go to the local music shop, go to the local music school, go to the local record store, the local radio station. That's how you sell events. Sorry, David, sorry. Sorry about that. That's how you sell stuff, by being, proactive locally and dealing with people. I mean, yeah, it's great, but I do sort of feel, and I do see it with players that have become sort of obsessed with the hits. It's an adrenaline hit. There's no doubt. Look how many likes I've got. It reacts to endorphins in the brain. It's addictive, and it's like I see drummers like that, especially after the pandemic, that just seem to have gone down a rabbit hole of posting more and more extreme and unusable drumming. It has its role, but don't tell me it's the be all and end all. And it's certainly, in the machine of the music industry, if a label decide that a band is going to break who do absolutely no social media and are completely anti social media, that band will still break.
Because you've been thriving in the industry for a long time, and I wondered if you feel you've had to adapt and change in any way, or linked to social media, or aside from it.
Not linked to social media. No, I haven't, because as I say, I enjoy my time, my bits and pieces. I mean, and if you've ever seen them, I learned, I hated the pandemic for when I was teaching for a fairly renowned educational establishment, and I was literally told, well, you've got to teach online I didn't even know what that meant. I literally did not know. And I still, I very rarely do Zooms. I very rarely do it because I found it so stressful during the pandemic trying to work out the microphone and how this worked and what are we doing. And then seeing my fantastic students locked away, I felt quite traumatized by it all and didn't feel particularly positive about the experience. And it's still now, it's like, shall we jump on a Zoom? No, let's just have a quick phone call or we'll meet. I'd rather do that. So no, I don't feel any pressure to adapt because of social media. I feel the ability to adapt, or the necessity to adapt, has come about through my family life, through having I've got 4 children from 32 to 15, and a grandson, so having to adapt, and a very, very successful wife as well. That's the reason that I've wanted to and made the effort to adapt. It's about the personal situation. I mean, and any time I feel any sort of guilt or a bit of like, oh, should I be a bit more engaged, I just put in Elon Musk onto Google and I realise that I'm right.
Yes, I need to do the same. That's really good.
Let's do it.
So you mentioned you had 4 kids. Can you take me back to when you discovered you were going to be a dad and what that was like?
It was pretty incredible. My son Curtis, I got married we were 28, I think, when I got married to Hayley, my ex-wife, and Curtis came along very, very quickly. That's when I think the reality, because as I say, I was 28, and I've spoke to a lot of drummers about this, and I'm sure you've got thoughts of your own thoughts about it. Touring is a different ball game when you've got kids, and it was very, very tough because Curtis was born all 4 children were born in the same hospital, incidentally, but Curtis was born, and I remember telling John, Paul's dad and manager, like, I've got a son, and he's like, it's brilliant. He said, but we're going to Japan next week. And I literally had to go to Japan a week after Curtis was born. We had a mortgage, we had a house. You make these choices, you have to sort of do it. It's really interesting, this idea of the show must go on. You get kind of, well, I've got to do that, the loyalty. And it's right, you've got to have some sort of loyalty, else nothing would ever matter. But for that early period, from 1990 to 1997, when 2 children came along, Curtis and Christabel, I was on tour for pretty much 7 years. So, we started in 1989 and finished in 1997. By the end of that, I had 2 children. So, I really did found that quite hard, missing the birthdays, not missing Christmases, but there'd always be that thing. And you think, you've really got to make sure that you know why you're doing it and what you're doing it for. And, that responsibility is yours. You've got to take that on board, and you've got to make sure that when, that you are 100% focused on what the reason for that next tour is. And I do understand that probably for a lot of musicians, that being single, having no obligations is probably easier, just to be able to get up and go, rather than being that kind of, 28 kids, absent parent that's never there and on tour all the time, And I found it, I did find it quite hard, and I'm sure Hayley would have her, maybe interview her about it, because, she was dealing with a lot of that stuff of being away, which was, I'm sure, pretty hard.
So did that time influence what gigs you took, or anything further down the line when you had 2 more children?
No, because that was that time when I was working with Paul. You just, you got the gigs in and you had to go with it. I would say with the twins, Vic and Louis, who are 15, it's been very different. It's been a very different experience. For one, Sally, my wife, has an incredibly successful career. Just as a couple, you have to kind of accept that somebody is doing better than the other one, because it's like, I'm not going to tell her to not be doing this amazing filming in Canada because I've got a 200 quid gig in a jazz club in Southeast London. It just does not make sense. So we've really made it work. And the thing I think that's different, I think that we are absolutely 100% in line with is that we know why we're doing it. We know what we're doing it for. We communicate about it. We're incredibly grounded. If something comes in, we will literally say, so what does this bring to the table in terms of the effect on both of us and the children and the boys? I mean, boys, they're young men. And from that point of view, I mean, obviously, when I first met Sally, she was in a really big famous show called Coronation Street. So it was like this kind of weird exposure to fame that I'd never seen, you know, like even with the bands, it's just a different thing. So that was an interesting kind of thing when we first got together. But I think that we're very, very like-minded. We're very sort of assured about what we're trying to do as a family. We're very aware of how hard it is. You know, we take nothing for granted. And I mean, you know, as two creatives, the day we went into the first lockdown, we're just looking at each other going, you know, my diary finished. Sally's diary was like, that's not happening, that's not happening. And you're just thinking, right, okay, so what do we do now? And you know, we adapted, and she'd worked really hard and managed to get a show commission called the Madame Blanc Mysteries, which has been very, very successful. While she was kind of getting that geared up as productions were starting to happen in 2020, she said to me, like, you know, why don't you do the music? You know, you've got all this music that you've been working on with Chris Haig, and, you know, why don't we see if we can't make something work? Chris and I we'd had this album out, we were going to be a band, and that all got kind of kibosh because of the pandemic. Suddenly we were like involved with composing music for a TV show, which Chris had some experience with, but I really not. And that was like a real big learning curve. But that was amazing because very quickly the show became pretty successful, and successful in America, Australia, Canada. And it's kind of grown from strength to strength. So that being open to be diverse was always something that I was completely into. And it just means having those extra strings to the bow means that, you know, while this sort of golden period is happening for Sally, while she's really, you know, in Canada and in Basque Country and filming and in you know, demand, which she is, we can work together and make sure that for our boys, there's one of us is always pretty much around. Then we have a third person. We have Lisa, who's been with us since the boys were 4 days old, Auntie Lisa. And if it's not me, if it's not Mum, it's Auntie Lisa. And so they don't see the join. And that's all I want. I mean, at the moment, they barely talk to me, to be honest. Two 15-year-old boys, it's literally, I don't know if you've got experience, but they don't say a lot.
How is it, though, with your son who's into drumming? You must have a connection there.
Well, this is amazing because Louis, one of the twins, is working really hard on guitar and showing amazing results, and he's doing really well acting. So Sally's like kind of going, oh, you know, but and he's really good. So he's doing really well. And then Victor was, you know, really excelling in football. And he came to the drum academy that I do with George, that we've been doing for 25 years, Freddie G last year. And he said, I want to come back to the drum academy because I really enjoyed it, but I don't want to be the worst player here. And I went, okay, so what do you want to do then? And he just said, I want to learn how to play. So I have a drum room and I could just hear him in there sort of like tap, tap, bash, bash, tap, bash, bash. And I do subscribe to the fact that I think it's quite difficult to be a dad and a drum teacher, like teaching your kid to drive. His biggest hero is Pat Garvey, it's not me. Vic loves Pat Garvey. He loves Craig Blundell. He adores Greg Bissonette. I'm all right, but Todd Zuckerman, you know, he's very different, and I want him to be different, and I want him to not be intimidated or worry about what his dad's done. But what's been brilliant about it is, like, with football, which he's very good at, I was just standing at the side, you know, I'm just sort of stood there or next week, you know, you don't have a lot because he's got a coaching staff and, you know, his mates, and I'm just kind of taking him there and picking him up. But with drumming, I can sit down and go like, look, try this or just try that. And he's had some lessons with one of the drummers that was on the drum academy, James, who's like 20, which I think is great because he's 15 more in the age group. But I've just said to him, you've just maybe really got to enjoy it And then occasionally he'll come in and he'll go, look, I need to learn this, so I want to do that. And so I bought him the Jim Chapin book and just said, look, this is what we need to do. And then he's moved my drum kit up and put his drum kit in next to mine. So, it's really good. And it's lovely because, especially with the music, with both of them, we went to see Pulp all together as a family, and it was brilliant. And they want to go and see Madness and Squeeze at the O2, and they're going to see Bastille next week. So there's much more of a bond because I can sort of flex my musical influence and make things happen for them, which is great.
How is he receiving feedback from you then? If you're saying, "Oh, just try this," is he fully accepting, or is there resistance?
There's sometimes the odd little bit of, oh, Dad, but then he has to, because that happens to anybody. You as a parent, you tend to be the uncoolest person in the world at certain points, and then they really need you. I'm very mindful of, not pissing on his chips in terms of his progress, because I want him to enjoy it. And with the state of the music business, I am in absolutely no way, shape or form going, they're going to be professional drummers, they're going to be professional. I don't want that because it's really, really hard, not impossible. But I can see from that point of view to both of them, the absolute benefits of being out playing an instrument as a social skill. They could go to college or get a job, go and work in another country and get up and play a couple of Beatles tunes. Communication. That's what I want for while they're at this age, to really enjoy it, to learn, to be as good as they possibly can, but to just not get competitive. They don't need to enter competitions and things like that. Just really, really enjoy it. And I will, eventually, when they're able to kind of have the time, say, go and join a band, go and play. That's the thing to really go and experience. They did try to work together in the drum room. Louis took his guitar in, but they came out and they kind of had a fight. So that could be a good thing. Could be,
What is it like with two boys as twins? Do they get on usually, or do they fight a lot?
Not now. They're very, very close. Sometimes there's a competition. They just got their autumn reports in, and they both did really well. And one of them says, "Yeah, but I did better than he did." It's like, look, stop that. It's like the competition is everywhere, not you two. What I think is so lovely is they don't even know they're doing it. They look after each other. Like, one will get him from school if the other one's not with him. First thing he'll say is like, "Where's my brother? And it's like, all right, dinner's ready," and they'll call for their brother. Or it's just, and I don't think they have. I don't think they mean to do it. I just think that's a twin thing, or it's a twin thing that I've observed. It's just they're just so used to being together. They don't look identical or anything like that, but there's a really, really unshakable bond that I think is amazing, and I think it's something that is going to be incredible for them as they grow into good young men, I think.
I believe you have a clinic coming up next month, but can you tell us a little bit about what you've got coming up, what we can look forward to?
It's gone really silly busy. Sally's back from Spain next week, and then what tends to happen is that I then start to get a bit busy. I've been working with Chris Haig, and we've done the music for the Madame Blanc Christmas special. Chris and I have been working on a solo album, which is coming out next year, which I'm really excited about. So Chris and Joel, a trio kind of jazz, funky soul record. And then I've got some live shows for that in April and May, which is going to be interesting. And then possibly going out to Italy. I just did an album for a fantastic young artist called Luca May, part of this sort of real interesting, burgeoning London scene with people like Laurie Wright and the Molotovs and Luca. So I did her album, and I think the first single's coming out Friday. There's Earthanaut, which is a guy called Terry Shaughnessy, who I've done 6 or 7 tracks on his album. I've got a couple more to do for him. Then the clinic is coming up in Hawley on the 4th of December. I kind of don't really call them clinics anymore. It's more sort of an evening with, because now, what I'm really happy to do is, as long as nobody's kind of completely filming it, I'm happy to chat about some of the stuff I've done, because obviously some of the people that come, they're interested in working with Paul for so long and working with all the different bands that I've had. So I'm really happy to chat about that and give a little insight, but I just don't want it filmed. I just don't, let's just be in a room and we can have a chat, and maybe I'll tell you something that I've never told an audience about what happened on because you're right, reacting and remembering stuff. So I really enjoy that. I did one with Pat Garvey in Brighton a few weeks ago, where played for a bit, played along to some songs, a little bit of educational stuff, and then Pat, we just had a bit of a chat, and it was really good. So, I mean, clinic is such a drum clinic. It's like, you take a sick drum along. It's a weird sort of thing to describe an experience. So I like doing the play-alongs. I mean, it's impossible. You can't have a band at one of these events. So I try not to make them too complicated technically, because it becomes a pain, and then you're putting on a gig rather than just one person having an experience with. But I like the idea of an evening with, because, you get to a point where you think, well, I do realise that I've got a lot of interesting experiences under my belt over 45 years as a professional drummer, with a lot of great bands and a lot of great musicians. So if people are still interested to come along, then I'm happy to sort of talk about it. It gets to a point where, people do start to sort of think more about things that were special to them, rather than embracing new things. It is harder to sell new music than it is to resell packages. It's not having a pop at people, but there's lots of 30th anniversaries of this and 40th anniversaries of that. I get that, because people of that demographic want to go and see a surefire. They want to know what they're going to see. I totally understand that. I do get a little bit upset with the reticence to go and see a new band and pay £8, and people are like, no. That apathy side of things, come on, go and, if we're cutting off the blood supply if we don't support new bands, and eventually everyone's going to do that like farewell tour, and then what we're going to go and see. Maybe we would have all had enough by then, but I'm still very much try to support and nurture younger talent if it comes along.
How do you prepare for your evenings with? Do you prepare for the technical side? Do you prepare for the speaking to people, or are you just quite happy to talk in public about any unexpected questions?
As you can probably tell, talking is not a problem. It's like, it's not one word answers. The technical side of things. I mean, I really, really still enjoy playing the drums. And, the dog's been out and things have been done. Before the boys come home today, I've got 5 or 6 hours. I will do 3 hours in the drum room, because I'm working on another drum book with Russ Tarley. So that'll be our third sort of technical book. So I'll do a bit of work on that, and then I'll do some practice, because I just love it. And everything's gone a little bit lighter. I listen to jazz all the time. I listen to people like Art Blakey and Philly Joe Jones, and that's the kind of drumming that I absolutely, totally aspire to and totally love. So it's no point sort of me trying to get excited about the potential of playing for the Foo Fighters, because it's never going to happen. I'd never want to do it. It's not my thing. I'm much more into sort of groove stuff that's lighter. And I've really just kind of calmed everything down a little bit. And I'm a big fan of Steve Smith and how he sort of developed. And I do a lot of that kind of study now, where everything is about sort of minimal motion and just not wasting energy to do stuff. And it's been really successful. I had quite a nasty, what I thought was a bit of a game-changing thumb injury. I did something to my thumb. I hurt it in 1994, never been brilliant. Then over the summer, it was absolutely killing me, to the point where I actually thought, I've kind of had a good run at this, so the dog walking business is probably a good idea, simply because it was just hurting all the time. And I went to see a few different people about it, And I went to see an acupuncturist who's absolutely fantastic. And she was just brilliant. And she was like, no, look, this is a curable injury, but you've got to do this. We need to do that. It was a combination of kinesiology. It was a combination of acupuncture, supplements, discipline, all the things, dietary, all the stuff I do try to do all the time. And it's healed. And I'm not saying it's going to be the case every time, because I genuinely thought it was hurting all the time. And it started to be like a toothache, just constantly, and then you just think, oh, well, this is what it is. And I was so absolutely delighted to be proved wrong, and just by a little bit of application to have overcome this. And I'm very grateful about that. But it's made me kind of be more aware of touch, that you don't need to smash a weight. Nothing wrong with that, but you can get a lot of great sound with good technique. So that's what I'm kind of working on. And now things are sort of back on track physically. I'm really, really enjoying it.
Have you had to make any adjustments then in that sense for your thumb?
What I was doing when it was really hurting was making unnecessary, like I was trying to hold it in a position that didn't hurt, and that was making everything else hurt. So I had to kind of go in and get to the source of the problem. So now I'm just very much aware of not over gripping. That is the thing I think that did it for me, was that it's tension. It's just tension, because that natural motion is going back to what Bob would say, or what Dave Hassel would say, or Bruce Becker would say, that kind of natural motion, that everything is kind of there. That power is there if you have the right technique. And that is what I've become really, really obsessed with. I did a class with Bruce Becker a few weeks ago, which was absolutely fantastic. I mean, his knowledge is just, it's mind-blowing. And so I took stuff from that, which was really, I need to think about that, So that's how I've kind of adapted. And I just think it's all got a lot lighter and a bit more sort of purposeful when I play. And literally not trying to, not the overexertion, because it doesn't, for me, create a louder or more effective groove or beat. And you've only got to look at someone like Steve Smith. He just doesn't move, apart from the blaze of hands. But it's just so effortless. And that for me is my sort of constant goal in terms of drumming. Because the more relaxed you are as a drummer, the more relaxed you're going to be playing music. And that's a good thing.
I love it. You're like still taking inspiration from so many people, and in this place where you're just wanting to get better and better and better. And I think that's wonderful, because I think some drummers can get stuck. They're like, oh, I don't need lessons anymore, or I don't need to improve,
I was watching some Gregory Hutchinson videos last night, him playing sort of fast tempos, and just thinking, I've got to work on that tomorrow. That is just incredible. Do you know what? The thing is about it is that to me, it's always been a therapy. Drums has always been a therapy. It's always been music. In all honesty, it's why I've kind of cut back my teaching in some ways, because sometimes it's quite hard to be positive. And you don't want to be sort of going into a drum teacher who's just moaning about the state of the Labour Party all the time. It's not attractive, and it's not good. But it's really hard sometimes to sort of, to turn around and think, oh yeah, well, there's some light at the end of the tunnel, because there always is going to be, but sometimes it just doesn't feel there is. And, as I say, my sort of faith is always going to be in young people, and realise that just in probably 15 years, President Trump, President Putin, Xi Jinping, Nigel Farage, they'll all be dead. So my optimism for a better place is constant, because there's all these young minds that are going to come through and just hopefully take us to a better place. But at this point, sometimes you kind of go, oh, it does look a bit shit out there, And for me, that drumming is just still such a, I can go and do some Charlie Wilcoxon, and I know it might sound a bit naive, but you can just switch off. We talk a lot about mindfulness and mental health, and we talk about supporting people, and I completely get that. But one of the things that has really worked for me is just to switch off, go in and just play the drums for an hour. And that for me is, as you know, one of the outstanding things about music, and why I get so dismayed about when any cuts in education, it's music that sort of gets cut first, because we're not, you know, and then yet they're talking on the radio this morning about the £8 billion that the music industry brought into the country's, you know, coffers last year, and yet it's sort of a subject that, you know, is not valued, it's not sort of supported. I think that's a really sort of sad thing, because it, you know, music can have amazing impact on autism. It can have amazing, you know, impact on people that are angry and depressed. It can bring so much to it. We're not talking about being professional drummers or musicians, but just going in and playing some hand drums and, you know, just getting to wail on a drum kit for half an hour or sit at a piano can just take your mind to a better place. And that for me is still, you know, that was always the case as a young drummer, and it's still the case for me now.
Thank you. It's been really, really wonderful to speak to you. And
I didn't swear.
You didn't swear. And Kira didn't swear either. She usually does. So it was a first for everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Drummer Mamas podcast. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave us a 5-star rating, because it makes us more visible to other listeners. And we really do appreciate any comments or reviews. It makes a difference. Thanks again, and see you next time.